Why do people quit QLA? That's a question I get asked a lot. It's also something that I see a lot. I've certainly seen my share of people quit QLA. So why does that happen? And how can you avoid the lessons learned in the people that quit? First thing is, usually people give a financial reason. They say, well, I quit because I ran out of money. I didn't have any way to get the capital, et cetera, et cetera. There's always a way, in my experience, to find a way to find capital. Oftentimes, it requires you going far outside your comfort zone, asking people, contacts you have, et cetera, if they can help you. That's a hard process, and you better get ready for a lot of rejections. And I've talked about some of the ones I went through originally. So I would encourage you to read Release Your Brakes by James Newman. It'll talk about comfort zone. It'll talk about how to get outside your comfort zone. So I think that's the first thing. The second is, what's your why for the reason you want to do QLA? A lot of people say to me, I don't care about the industry. I just want to make a lot of money. And I have nothing against making a lot of money. I think that's a great thing. But it's not good enough. There's got to be a reason beyond that why it's important to you. Now, let me give you an example. I talked with someone recently that I talked to maybe 6 months ago. He was an engineer's engineer. He was in Australia. He was telling me he wanted to roll up 3D printing companies and to acquire manufacturing companies. Seemed like a plan that might be able to work. I said, why is this important to you? And he really didn't have a good answer. And I said to him, you ought to think about that, because this is hard. QLA is simple. As I've said many times, simple is not the same as easy. The example I use is pretty simple to run a 4-minute mile. You just put one foot in front of another fast enough to run 4 minutes for that mile. Easy? Not so much. So he said, okay, I'll think about that. And he called me last week and he said, I've thought about what you said about my why, and I don't want to do 3D printing anymore. And I said, okay, what do you want to do? He said, I want to do personal security and building security. Whoa, that's certainly different than 3D printing. What's your reason behind wanting to do that? And what he told me was his father had been killed in a Sri Lanka bombing by a terrorist, and he didn't want that to happen to somebody else if he had a way to prevent it. Now, does that suck? Yes. You and I both know that that sucks. Is that a powerful motivation for doing QLA? Absolutely. And so while there's great tragedy in what happened to him, it's also something that's going to be very, very powerful when he ends up talking to Dream Team members, professionals, etc., about the reason he's doing all of this. And so I would encourage you to work hard on your why. Why is it important to you? Beyond just the money. The money is a byproduct of doing something with excellence. Most of the time, inspiration or desperation ends up fueling those fires. More times than not, unfortunately, it's desperation. The other thing that frequently people don't understand is, and we say it all the time, you got to kiss a lot of frogs in this business. So what does that mean? And what's an example of that? I was asked by Dan to be his master of ceremonies in London for his one-day event. And during that time, Brian Rose of London Reel was also there. And Brian and I were in the green room waiting to go up on stage. And I asked him about London Reel and how it was going. And he said it was going well. I told him I thought he'd done a lot of good interviews, which I do. He said, yeah. He said, I said, how many people do you have now? And he said, 17. I said, oh, what do they do? Well, most of the time they end up working to set up interviews for me. He doesn't pay for an interview. He doesn't pay for the expenses to get there. So you have to pay and you have to sit in the chair and be interviewed. The reward for that is he's got a big following, so you get a lot of exposure. So I asked him, let's say you want to get 100 guests. You're going to schedule that over the next 6 months, but you want to fill 100 slots. So how many people do you have to talk to get 100? And I'd ask you now to take a piece of paper out or pencil, or at least just think of it. How many people do you think he has to talk to, or his staff talks to get 100 yeses? Okay. Got a number? The number was 10,000. 10,000 prospects to get 100 to say yes. Another way to look at that, 9,900 people say no to him to get the 100 that say yes to him. Most people just aren't willing to do that. And so they're not willing to take that much rejection. This is a numbers game. If you want to know the secret sauce, that was just the secret sauce. You have to follow the steps, and you have to kiss a lot of frogs and not quit in the process. Okay. In terms of following the steps, it's important, critically important, to follow the QLA steps. If you want, you can go on my website and grab a course that I put together, which was a short version of how to do that and what those steps were. It includes a Zoom call with me, which I wanted to do to make sure people got off on the right foot. You can certainly take a look at that. But also remember that perfection does indeed equal paralysis. I used to do some endurance events, and when I was training for a marathon, I just didn't start off by running a marathon. I started off by a 5K and a 10K and a half marathon and ultimately a marathon and ultimately some century cycling events. But that was a process. I got better. I learned how to do it and took a step at a time. And the same is true with this. Follow the steps. A lot of people want to jump to a deal without building a dream team, without getting the professionals on board, and that usually is an absolute disaster. So I want to take a few minutes to talk to you about why my observations, why people quit, and how you can avoid falling into that same trap. So the important things are: understand about your emotional bank account. Understand that this is a numbers game and you have to kiss a lot of frogs. Understand that the steps of QLA that Dan Pena created back in 1993 are critically important to follow in order and do that. And this process works. And then once you have enough understanding of that and you've worked on your self-image to the point that you're convinced you can do this, I am absolutely convinced that you will and can achieve success if you don't quit, if you follow the steps, and if you've done all the prerequisite work. That's not a guarantee. I never guarantee success to anyone, but all you have to do is listen to podcast number 23 and number 54 to relate to somebody who you might be able to relate to and look at the success that he has had, Sean in this case, in following the steps and the lessons learned. So that, I think, is helpful. Go out there and do those things, and in the end, you will enjoy some success I don't believe you ever thought was possible, as long as you keep at it. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments or ideas for future episodes, please email bruce@brucewhipple.com. And if you're not already on our mailing list, head over to brucewhipple.com and sign up and grab any of the free reports. That'll put you on the mailing list. There is a lot of free information you can use to acquire already profitable businesses. This is Bruce Whipple. Thanks for listening to the Business Acquisition Podcast. And remember, you miss 100% of the opportunities you failed to take. And procrastination truly is the thief of time. So do something today, please. Your future self will be proud of you.